funny thing is with mental health is that it can manifest itself in so many different ways, and it can cause so many different reactions in so many different ways depending on their personalities.
Hello and welcome to the Straight Talking Doctor podcast. My name is Dr. Mark Cox, and this is the podcast dedicated to improving your health and happiness. My aim is to demystify the complex world of wellness and mental health through eye-opening conversations with guests from any and every walk of life. No topic is out of bounds, no question too big or too small. As well as discussing my guests' inspiring stories, I want my conversations to fuel you all with useful and actionable tips that you can adopt into your daily lives. In this first series, we shall be taking a journey into mental health, tackling topics such as dealing with trauma and depression, overcoming addiction, and beating cancer not once, but twice. So thank you for joining me on this journey. Please sit back, get comfortable, and enjoy the ride. Now, where to start with this one? Today's episode is with a very special guest, Matt Swabey. Matt and I became friends at university, and I think I can honestly say that at that time in our lives, we probably never thought we'd have a conversation quite like this one. In this conversation, Matt opens up about his mental health and how he had hidden the issues he was having for so many years. The eloquent way he talks about such a potentially sensitive subject is something that I know that many of you will really resonate with. We discuss how Matt managed to make changes and seek support, how mental health is well and truly a spectrum, the stigma that still surrounds it, how university is a potential minefield for mental health, and the damaging effect alcohol can have on our minds. We also discuss lots of useful tips and tricks we can all use to reach out to our friends, approach difficult conversations, and help people open up. This was the very first podcast I recorded and holds a special place in my heart. Thank you, Matt, for joining me, and I hope you all enjoy.
I've had multiple conversations about your podcast with sort of our extended members of friends and members of our social circle, and I think you're completely right. One of the things I'm going to come on to is how shocked I was listening to it, but also just inspired by how eloquently you were able to speak about your experiences. And I think, that's been echoed by the conversations I've had with other people. So it's the bravery to come out and say it first of all, and how much that will potentially help other people. So I thought it's about maybe a year on or so, is it, from the podcast?
Yeah, it's basically about a year on, I'd say.
I thought it would be really interesting today to maybe talk a bit about, your experiences again, similar concept to what was on your first podcast, but then maybe about some of the bits that have changed as well. Mm-hmm. So why did you go into the podcast then originally?
So it was kind of, again, slightly serendipitous in the fact that, so the guy who's hosting the podcast, one of my best friends from uni, Alexi, who I lived with in my second and third year, I had been going to therapy for about 3 or 4 months by this time, every single week, every Monday. And I was starting to tell some of the people that were close to me. And obviously Alexi was one of the people that I wanted to speak to. So I was like, this is what's been going on in my life. I've sort of been keeping this sort of darker side of me that I was sort of mainly reserved for myself for a long time, away from everyone. And I'm now trying to be a bit more open about it. And so I'm telling some people that I've been going to therapy, and just thought I'd let you know because you're a close friend of mine. And he was like, that's, firstly, thank you very much for telling me. Similar reaction of being very shocked, and then also, very happy that he's, I've told him. But then he's also doing his own, he was like, funny enough, I'm sort of planning, me and my brother planning to do our own podcast on mental health. Would you like to come on? And I was like, yeah, I would love to, but personally right now, I don't think I'm ready. I'm still, fairly early on into therapy.
Yeah,
I hadn't discovered
What was the gap between them asking you and you getting ready to be able to actually go on that podcast and talk about your experience?
Probably another 4 or 5 months, potentially even longer. Sure. Just because I knew I wasn't ready. I couldn't even begin to really articulate what I had experienced, what I was going through. And in order to go on a podcast, you have to have that sort of level of experience of talking about your emotions and your feelings for long enough. And by the time I went on the podcast with Alexi, I'd been seeing a therapist speaking about this stuff every week for a year. Yeah. So it's not sort of by chance that you end up being more comfortable speaking about these, or better prepared to speak about, mental health from going, because, when I look back at it, I've been to 3 different schools over, 20 years of education, 2 different universities, and up until I started going, I guess mental health had not really been mentioned to me as a word full stop.
Yeah.
So it sort of leaves me entirely unsurprised that the majority of people, when asked the very simple question, how are you? Even if they want to speak about it, which obviously lots of people don't, they actually don't have the tools or the language in order to articulate what they're feeling.
100%.
So I think it creates a massive barrier in order for people who, once they make the decision to want to seek help, they don't even know where to start. They don't know what to say. They don't know who to go to. So there's just so many barriers to entry, or even once you even get there, which is a difficult place to even get to.
Yeah, I mean, that's such an interesting concept about until you're in that position, dealing with your own mental health, it's difficult to even understand and realise that those barriers to entry, like you said, I think it's a great way to describe it, are there. And things that stop you that you think should be easy. It should be easy to do this, but they're not, and it's difficult.
Yeah.
So let's go back a little bit. What was university like for you? What was going on? Now you've had the experience. Can you reflect on that for us, and what, in terms of specifically your mental health?
Yeah. So I guess because you're kind of a product of your own environment and your own experiences. So I guess the mental health journey really started from day dot. But university, when I talk about university, I don't want people to think that I had an entirely bad time or I've got no happy memories. I've made lots of lifelong friends, had so many good times at university while I was there. But at the same time, I was struggling a lot and very much keeping it to myself. And I think because I've always been an inherently anxious person, I've been, inherently an overthinker. I've had a lot of insecurities around rejection and exclusion from sort of a young age. And that sort of can easily manifest itself in that sort of university environment, I think. And so I think my anxiety levels they started, at a poor level in first year, and then, got worse as I went into my second year. Because the thing is with mental health, people sort of think it's like a box that you tick or it's black and white. It's not. It's a spectrum that every single person is on, and it's constantly moving. It's not like it's some sort of static linear being. It's something that's constantly changing. It's constantly that is so dynamic. And so I think there's something that as a concept that people really struggle with, that everybody is on it at some point. So throughout university, my mental health had good days, had bad days, had good weeks, bad years. I had good years and bad years. My second year was, worse than my first year. My third year was better. My master's was bad. And then my first year in the job is when it, got the worst ever. So, it constantly chops and changed. Sure.
And you're saying that there's different sort of times that you go up and down on this spectrum. I think the spectrum sort of analogy is really important and quite descriptive of what it's actually like. Everyone falls at there. Sometimes the spectrum is really thin and you feel like you can just fall off at any point. And sometimes you feel like you've got loads of support there. And I think having those sort of analogies you can refer back to really helps and makes people understand mental health a little bit better. You said the year of work was tough and probably where things got worse. What was the turning point? What happened that made you, seek help?
I think I've kind of had a couple turning points, because I first sort of noticed that my mental health wasn't good in probably my second year, when I felt that my sort of social anxiety was getting worse. I sort of was probably drinking to excess more and more. And then I had my first panic attack sort of I think halfway through my second year of university, and which was like a really, really scary experience, because I've never had one before. I've never had someone describe it to me before. So like when my heart's, you feel like you're having a heart attack. You literally feel like you're going to die.
You think you're going to die.
Yeah, you start feeling dizzy, you start feeling sick. Like you feel like the world is like crushing in around you. Like it literally is a flat 0 out of 10 experience. Would not recommend. Like it's
don't try this at home if you can avoid it.
Please don't. It's honestly. So like when that happened, I was like, that was like a big sticking point. So that's not normal. That was like a very visceral, physical reaction to make that point that something is not right. And so then I was like, okay, something's not right. I spoke to one of my housemates in uni, but nobody else. I still very much kept it under wraps that this even happened. And I booked to go to a therapist at university. Again, it wasn't made clear that there's counsellors or anything at university, but they all have them. But like, I was not really at all aware of them at the start. During freshers week, it's not like, by the way,
I don't think I knew.
Yeah, the only reason I knew is because I had to go proactively ask. And so I booked to go and then never went.
Yeah, and which I think is a case in lots of people as
well.
Huge
amount, yeah.
I think that's that building up the confidence to go and do something about it is not the same as necessarily following through with that, and particularly if you're in that headspace at the time.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely a confidence thing. I mean, it's a combination of denial, sort of in fear and embarrassment. So like denial of how bad the issues are.
Yeah.
Fear of sort of showing that level of vulnerability and emotion, particularly I think for males, is a scary concept. And, you know, scared of how, I mean, I was so scared of other people finding out that I was going and thinking that you're going to judge me and think I'm less of a man, less of a person because of it. So
that's
lots of these
that's
reasons,
the stigma, isn't it, around mental health, which is still there.
Still there.
We're trying to break down, and I think by talking about it, or you're obviously taking steps, but it doesn't necessarily fix it for that person that is having that mental health issue.
No, not at the time.
Just because someone says we're breaking down the stigma doesn't mean that you're not going to feel embarrassed or scared of what
the stigma is broken down when you don't feel embarrassed and it becomes second nature. That's when the stigma is no longer there.
Which takes a lot of time, effort, confidence, bravery, courage.
Yeah. So second year, I guess that's when but then never went about it. And then I sort of like didn't have a panic attack for a couple of weeks. I was like, oh, I'm fixed, which is obviously like a silly thing to think about because you don't think about that with your physical health. You don't think when you feel ill, you don't magically get better. I didn't make any changes to my lifestyle or my life at all when I just assumed I was going to be better just because I didn't have a panic attack in the last 2 weeks. Silly way to think because obviously they happened again and it didn't become any better.
It made life easier for you to think like that though, didn't it? It means you didn't have to come out and face
denial. It was just a classic case of denial. So I never did anything about it. And then I guess, got better and then things got a bit better in third year, but then, masters, first year work got worse and worse and worse. And then I kind of like ended up in some weird, like abusive relationship with myself where I was just, pretty horrible to myself, mentally. And, occasionally I'd never self-harmed in the sense of trying to commit suicide, but like I'd be punching walls. I'd be like hitting myself when I was getting frustrated. I'd be like, you're such a fucking loser. No one likes you. It got to a stage where I was like saying, I hate myself. Sure. And it got to, I remember, alcohol always fueled it and never made it any better. Yeah. And I remember I sort of woke up after one sort of bloody nice house and I looked at my room was trashed, which occasionally happened when I got back in a rage of sort of self-hatred. I used to sort of like trash my room and then have to wake up early and then have to tidy it before anyone else even came into my room because I didn't want people to know that I did it. Yeah. But I messaged my friend being like, I'm so sorry. I'm a shit person. I hate myself. And I remember looking down at my phone and seeing... because
this when you were on a night out?
This is on a night out, yeah. And I remember looking... because these things that I've reserved for myself and never said to anyone, but then seeing it written down, the words I hate myself, was like again, it was one of those like scary, horrible moments. I was like, holy shit, that's, again, not normal. And I guess by this stage, because I'd become very good at hiding my emotions, putting on a brave face, and that was very much second nature. But I think after a while, like, it was getting too much and I was starting to break at the seam. I think, people again were starting to notice that something wasn't up. And it took two of my friends in the space of literally about a week to call me out on it, basically. And
did they do that individually?
Individually, didn't know each other. One was at university, one was from home. And one was, they both happened in slightly different instances. So one, I was at like a Christmas drinks and I made like an offhand comment about being anxious about something. And then the guy... and obviously, not going to mention any names throughout the podcast, GDPR will be kept. And he sort of pulled me aside and was like, look, you mentioned this, I picked up in it. Are you okay? What's up? And it kind of caught me off guard. I was a bit blindsided by it. But because of that, I was just like, you know what? I'm not. I think by that stage, I kind of wanted people to call me out on it because I knew that I needed help.
You were kind of ready, but didn't know.
Yeah. And so he could have asked me if I was okay and it was like, let's talk about this, blah, blah, blah. And then in similar incidents where I was out and the friend, looked at me and I was like, are you okay? What's up? And it wasn't the, are you okay? You don't know what's going on. It was something's up. I'm pretty sure something's up. Are you okay? And again, it's
direct rather than just a habitual question. Yeah, straight to the bullshit.
And I was like, you know what? I'm not, and I think I need help.
Well, good on them. And I think we'll come to in a little bit to talk about how we do approach people and maybe some of your experience on that.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, no, because I think just sort of on that point, the thing that they both did, which is so important, is that they both followed up and messaged me the next day and said, let's acknowledge that conversation that happened and let's reinforce the fact that I am actually here for you and we can talk about it and I'm going to help. Because that's something which, again, I've been guilty of in the past where, I think we've all sort of had those, those drunk 3 a.m. conversations in the smoking area where somebody gets emotional and says something that they're not okay or like they're upset about something. And then next day you kind of both pretend it doesn't happen and you both sort of sweep it on the carpet and it's not and nothing is solved. That person's still suffering.
That repetition is really important. It's actually something one of the early videos I did on my page was the 2 OK rule, which is something Roman Kemp talks about on his documentary. I just thought such a simple, easy trick you can put into your life that shows that you're not just asking, are you okay, as a greeting. It's not just like something that you throw off the cuff to your friend when you meet them. It's, no, are you really okay? And you know, giving them that space to open up and have an opportunity to talk about it.
Sometimes you just need that second poke. And I've got an example of that like in my life recently, because I've been trying to become better, because obviously since the podcast, lots of people are, speaking about their issues, which is fantastic, and obviously encourage people to still do so. But I mean, an incident happened on a night out, which sort of made me worried about the state of my friend's mental health. And I sort of won't say any more than that, but I woke up next day, spoke to the guy in question. I was like, do you remember last night? And he was like, no, I don't. And in my head, I was like, I think he probably does. I think he's maybe potentially a bit embarrassed or like a bit ashamed about it. And I waited 5 minutes and I was like, you know what? Do you actually remember it? Pushed him again and he was like, yeah, I actually do. But like, it was so simple. All I had to do was push in that one extra time. Brilliant. And then he ended up, I was like, okay, cool. I'm glad we acknowledged it both happened. This isn't the time, the space, but let's put time in our diaries and we will speak about this sober. And it could have been so easy. And again, this is no blame, because I would have 100% done this in my past. And I, still not good enough as a person right now. We're all working versions of ourselves. But just give that extra little nudge if you think something's up.
And that's just a fantastic tip, and being able to back it up with real life experience. You learn so much more when actually you have that experience behind it. You're right about my reaction when I heard your podcast. I was shocked, and that's partly because of mainly because of our relationship at uni was very fun. You were life and soul when we were out for a drink. We had a lot of banter. Some would say it's a little bit laddie, and but we had a lot of fun. And you never realise when someone's like that there's potentially more beneath the surface that isn't going right. And maybe sometimes people are more like that because they're counteracting that. Yeah, and potentially, sure. I don't know if you found that yourself, but do you think that culture of university makes it harder for people to come and talk about their mental health and their issues if they're going through something? And did that for you? Yeah,
I mean, university is sort of a place where it's unsurprising that I think people struggle, because it's such a frenzy. There's so much going on, and again, like, university is great. Definitely go. I had lots of great times there. But there's so many pressures, there's so many incidences which can cause for, anxiety. You've got the academic pressures of getting through. I mean, personally, people who know me know that, my degree I wasn't exactly pushed. I didn't exactly work hard. So that wasn't stress for me. But I know for other people, that was definitely, at least for you, trying to balance out.
It could be pretty stressful at times.
That is stressful, was you trying to get a proper degree, not geography. And then trying to get a job. And trying to get internships. Obviously, by the time you leave university, you're meant to have 5 years worth of work experience these days. And so constantly trying to pick a career path, get all of that, those pressures, which, I was, trying to get jobs and graduate jobs and internships. You got those pressures. Balance that with, the social pressures of, there's so many different cliques at university. You have to sort of, pressures to wear the right thing, say the right thing, act in a certain way, all of which you feel like you can get judged on any single one of those. So there's so much room to be anxious. Who you're going to live with, who we're going to invite to, the prees, the birthday, the dinner party. There's so much, room for feeling excluded or, rejected from stuff. Yeah. And then all of this is sort of happening in a town and a city, which is, far away from home, far away from where you feel comfortable and safe potentially. Could be easily your first time away from home. Yeah. So it's already in a bit of an alien environment.
A mixing pot, isn't it?
It's an absolute mixing pot of all people. And then on top of that, you've got the sex, you've got the drugs, you've got the alcohol, all of which tends to not help these things, and which can easily put pressures on all relationships, both, romantic and friendships. And then on the background of that, in the day, we're only, 18, 19, 20, 21. All our physical, our body and our brains are still developing. Yeah, obviously at the time we think we're the top dog. We think we're so old and so wise. But when we look back at the time of university, how young are we there, and how immature, how little life experience do we have in order to cope with all these stresses that's going on? Yeah. So, I mean, when you look at it like that, and when I've had time to reflect on it, it's not remotely surprising at all, especially if you've come from an upbringing of, like we both said, didn't hear the word mental health. So if you're struggling from it, you wouldn't know that you were struggling because you didn't know what it was.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it's such a good description of the potential pitfalls of university and mental health, and there certainly is. I mean, it's just a complete cauldron of potential things that can go wrong and can really push you to perhaps not being in the best mindset.
Mm-hmm.
We also touched on before about what people did to you to help you talk about what had happened and what had been going on in your brain and how you'd been feeling. And so what would be your advice? Is there things that we can do better to help people perhaps open up?
I think the main thing, and this can be at a university, it can be in a workplace, it can be just in a friendship group. I mean, the same principles kind of apply everywhere, I think. It is just trying to create an environment in which people feel comfortable and not judged and open to having that discussion, because having the discussion and being open is the most critical, the most fundamental thing that personally benefited me, and I think benefited lots of other people in opening up. Because if you don't feel safe, you feel like you're going to be judged in any way, then you're probably not going to do it. You're going to keep everything behind closed doors. So just trying to reassure people that you're willing there, you're there, and you're open, you're supportive to the idea that they could be struggling. And this, I mean, this can be with anyone, but obviously particularly with your closest friends, because as you said, it's so hard to know sometimes if something is going on. So just trying to be, as I said, try to be as open and try to create an environment which people are comfortable to speak about is just essential.
Yeah. And on that, really, again, is there anything that you think we should look out for more in our friends? Is there anything that we can do to try and spot things more, other than just asking people a couple of times if they're okay rather than once? Is there any sort of signs that you think are maybe missed sometimes? As
we know, and as I guess I'm a kind of a prime example of, it can be very difficult, if not impossible, to spot if somebody is really having a tough time. So on that basis, I guess I would suggest with your closest friends, just check in every couple of weeks, every month, whatever it is. Just make sure, if in case you miss anything, have a check-in. Just because, why not? There's no downside to doing it. And you may have missed something, or they may have not wanted to bring something up because you don't bring down the mood or all these sort of rubbish reasons to not speak about it. So I would just, on that sort of basis, I would just check in every now and again, just because. Yeah. But on that, I think that looking back on it, because I spent a lot of time particularly during lockdown, there's nothing else to do but think, but I spent a lot of time thinking about sort of ways to spot. And I think the key thing that I've thought of is just looking out for changes in people's personalities. Because the funny thing is with mental health is that it can manifest itself in so many different ways, and it can cause so many different reactions in so many different ways depending on their personalities. And sometimes they can be exact opposites. Yeah. So like if you think about it, that does one, and that makes it harder to spot. But let me just give some examples. It can affect one person one way. So like if somebody who was generally used to be quite outgoing, and somebody stops going to social events, somebody a bit more reclusive, that can be a sign or an indication that maybe there's a bit socially anxious, something's going on. But on the other end of the spectrum, it could be somebody that is used to go out like a reason, but suddenly he's like the most drunk, he's going out all the time, he's going on a massive bender. And I've got examples from both my friends of mine who fit into both those categories, and both of them they're complete opposite in terms of the way that they've reacted to it, but they're both suffering from mental health. And it can be the same thing, it could be somebody who used to be quite tame, somebody has like a really short fuse and really angry, and then it could be somebody who suddenly loses all fight, and it can just completely be different in the way that people react.
Makes it even harder, like you say, to spot. But I guess that change, that dynamic shift in that person's personality or how they're acting and their behaviours is probably the thing to look for. Then it's that change.
Yeah, so just looking out for change, but just check in regardless.
And you've spotted, let's give a little example. You've spotted someone at your friends who's changed recently, and you think, that might be something going on. You've alluded to it a little bit, but how would you go about approaching them? What would be your ideal situation, and how would you go about opening that conversation?
Yeah, I think this is something that I think a lot of people worry about, because they're scared to breach the conversation, which I totally get. It's a scary conversation to have from both parties as well, not just the person who you're asking. But I guess my advice is, firstly, just don't overthink it. There's no such thing as a perfect way or a perfect place to ask. Yeah. The fact that you're asking is infinitely more important than the place in which you're asking. So don't I need to wait for the perfect time, or so it's not. It doesn't exist. Yeah. Ideally. But that being said, you obviously need to create an environment that would most likely elicit a positive and open and frank conversation. So that being said, you need to do it in a place which that person feels as comfortable as possible, I would say, because obviously this conversation is going to be as uncomfortable as they've probably ever had.
So maybe not a group conversation,
not a group conversation.
Not in a big, not at the pub in front of friends, which is pretty obvious. But getting someone maybe on their own potentially.
Yeah, one-on-one, or with a couple of their closest friends. But again, use your judgment. I'm sure the person doing the asking probably knows that person really well. So just use your judgment to be able to just do it. And as you said, tip of advice, make sure it's a place you're unlikely to be interrupted and unlikely to be overheard. I'd say those are probably the two critical things, because that would most likely, I mean, for me, I would have never said anything out loud to anyone if I thought I'd be getting like anxious about being anxious, which is sort of the ultimate irony. Yeah. And so the thought of other people knowing that I had this other side of me was like caused me anxiety, which is, again, fucking ridiculous. But so yeah, I think just don't overthink it. Find somewhere quiet where they're comfortable and you're not going to be interrupted. You got some time to just properly hash things out.
Yeah, no, amazing. You mentioned alcohol before, so as long as you don't mind, I want to know a little bit more about what your relationship with alcohol was, what it is, and what is its potential effect on mental health.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, alcohol is a funny old beast, because I've had some of the best times in my life with my friends and my family drinking, but then for sure, lots of my lowest points I've ever had have also been while drinking. So they can create such a wide spectrum of feelings and emotions. So it's a tricky one, but I think it's very fair to say, and looking back on particularly my time at university and sort of pre-going to therapy, that I had a fairly unhealthy relationship with alcohol. I mean, I definitely was not, as much as sometimes it was joked, I was never an alcoholic.
Yeah, you liked a beer.
Yeah, I did like a beer, and things I still bloody do. But I think my relationship has changed, because I think I used to use alcohol as some sort of numbing tool, as some sort of horrible form of escapism, where I feel like I needed to drink rather than I wanted to drink. And I think that's a really big shift that has sort of happened in the last couple of years, where like I'd have to drink by myself before I'd go to prees. So before prees, I'd be preeing by myself in my room, having a couple of beers before I'd even be able to go out to see people.
To help with the nerves, anxiety.
Blah. And then, so by the time I was pre-preeing before the prees, which is then before the trebles got. By the time I obviously got out, it's not surprised that I was absolutely out of my mind.
Price of trebles.
Especially the price of trebles didn't help. And so it's not bloody surprised that and it kind of makes me sad, because being blackout essentially became like, getting blackout drunk became my aim, rather than an unfortunate consequence. And sort of looking back, it kind of makes me a bit sad that was something that I basically aimed for most evenings, that I was out, because it's like I said, it was such a good numbing tool, and I thought that it would help me deal with my anxiety and my depression. But spoiler alert, it fucking didn't, and it made it worse half the time. And so it wasn't good. And the fact that, I'm so many at times, probably the majority of my nighttime, I don't even remember. It kind of makes me, on reflection, makes it a bit sad that that's the level, I guess, because I was basically just fucking abusing my body. Nobody used to drink as much as I used to drink. And the funny thing is that now I have a healthy relationship with alcohol. People haven't picked up the fact that I'm drinking less. I'm not going out less. I'm not necessarily drinking less, but I guess the drinks that I have now, I want to have, and as a result, I very rarely black out. And if I do, it's not the end of the world, because the funny thing is with if you black out, then you have mind blanks. And then because, when you're anxious, quite often if there's an unknown element, you will fill that with, horrible situations. This is something that everybody can relate to. The anxiety, when you can't remember a thing, you start thinking, oh my God, something's gone bad, you just assume the worst.
Yeah, you think back to that conversation, you think, oh God, what did that how did I say?
Yeah, exactly. And so that's obviously makes things way worse. And so obviously nothing has got better.
Yeah.
But yeah, obviously now I don't have any fear of, taking a single rather than a double, making sure everybody knows how to not get too drunk. And now I have a much healthier relationship with alcohol. Nobody has noticed that I drink less, but I do.
Yeah. I think, the amount of alcohol consumption and the way in which you drink is a symptom of your mental state some of the time, and you were clearly self-medicating with it in some way.
Yeah.
And now when you drink, you use it as the same that most people hopefully do in terms of a recreational thing that enhances a situation, rather than, you know, some sort of you know, medicine.
Yeah, and I've thought about this when I've looked back over sort of my adulthood since, you know, we started drinking. The person who is the most drunk at the party or at the club, in my experience, has almost never been the happiest person there. Every single person, I think that, oh my God, that person was so fucked, or there's that period of life where they used to drink a lot. They were always struggling with something. And it is, again, in terms of if you're looking for another way to spot, that's a good way to spot.
Yeah.
Because when I've gone looking back, there's been times where some of my friends, they've been going, like, absolutely getting way too fucked, and that's just such a symptom of somebody who's clearly not happy. Because if you're unhappy, you don't need to do it.
Yeah, I think when you fill a void in terms of your emotional state, don't you? And people do that with everything. That's what addiction really is. Yeah. Using external stimuli to fill an internal void, which I think is a really useful way to think of addiction and I guess substance abuse. And alcohol is a substance, but the same can be said with food or drugs, cigarettes, drugs, or anything like that. So yes, since you opened up on the podcast yourself last year, have you noticed any change within your friendship group? You know, are people having more open discussions? I guess for you, there must have been a lot. But in terms of the wider friendship group, do you think things have improved?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, I was very nervous, even though I'd had such positive reactions to people that I'd spoken to face-to-face about my mental health and the fact I was seeing a therapist and whatnot. I was still very nervous about what the reaction was going to be post-podcast and how, you know, what people's thoughts going to be, whether people start to treat me differently, etc. All those sort of old anxieties that I sort of used to have and still in some ways sort of do have, but, you know, to a much lesser and more healthy extent. And the reaction was so overwhelmingly positive. So I guess for those people who are a bit worried about how people can react, that is such a perfect example of how positively it will be receptive. If you're feeling anxious about opening up, the way that people reacted to my podcast is such a perfect reaction to show how positive people will be. But also, if people had seen the amount of messages and the variety of people that had messaged me or spoken to me saying, I used to go to a counsellor, I used to go to a therapist, I do go to a therapist, or holy shit, I think I'm really struggling at the moment, I need to go. You know, who do you see? Like, honestly, if I had to fucking swipe up for my therapy, like, hi guys, lots of you messaging me about, you know, where I get my therapy. If I had to swipe up, I'd be a rich man, because so many people have obviously since asked me about it. Yeah. So I think
you should be on commission.
I should be on commission. He owes me $1.
Yeah.
So honestly, if people had, it was just so reflective of how widespread the issues. So it was kind of scary about how widespread the issue really was, because it was an astounding amount of people that reached out to me. And that's just people who reached out to me. And I know there's been lots of people who wouldn't have.
Yeah.
So it's not going to be the total amount. So I guess that was very poignant in sort of showing the extent of essentially the epidemic that we're in, and half the reason that why you're obviously aware of it more than most people. But it was kind of scary, to be honest. But yeah, in terms of people's reaction, they were overwhelmingly positive, and people were opened up to me a lot. And also, it was also funny. Well, not funny, haha, but funny, interesting. In terms of the different ways in which people opened up to me. So obviously, I had lots of messages from guys and girls. So like, obviously, I don't want to make mental health, a guy's thing, because it'd be quite a male thing to do, to lay ownership to it in some ridiculous way. Absolutely affects both sexes. But I had so many guys come up to me sort of on nights out and be like, oh, I didn't want to speak to you, didn't want to message you, didn't want to be like, I don't want to be lame, I thought I'd be a pussy, don't want to be wet, but I'm actually having a really tough time, I really resonated with your podcast. I even had people who messaged me when they were out. People messaged me when they were drunk, and they were sliding into my DMs, bro, drunk, and I'm really struggling, I wanted to message you, but I didn't want to see him as a pussy, I'm so sorry, this is embarrassing. And I'm like, that is so reflective of the issues at hand, the way that you have to be half cut or full cut by the some of the messaging.
Spelling of the messages.
Yeah, exactly. And apologise. And then apologise and be like, I'm so embarrassed, I don't want to seem wet. That is so representative of the issues around of the stigma around particularly males showing vulnerability, and that it was like that's why I say it's funny. It was not funny. It was just interesting as to how reflective that was.
Yeah, the people's different responses, 100%. And to touch on that, 100%, it affects both sexes equally, but differently. And I think obviously the suicide rate, at the final end of the spectrum of mental health is terrible in both sexes, but particularly men. And I think one of the reasons why I even started this account to start talking about it is that we need to do something differently to allow men a get out before it gets to that point. Yeah. And that nature of being too proud to say anything or too scared or not having the resources around you or the tools that we mentioned at the start to come and open up, which is the thing that led to you changing your life. That needs to change somehow. And obviously it's a complex matter. There's no simple magic bullet that's going to fix that. But the first step is talking about it, reaching out to people and raising awareness, with weeks like Mental Health Awareness Week. That's the first step among the many that need to be taken.
Absolutely. I mean, it's just I guess it's just very ingrained from a young age that you should internalize your emotions.
Be a man.
As a man. Be a man and man up and all this stuff, which is obviously total rubbish. I mean, like, I was bullied at my prep school and didn't have a good time and had some unfortunate times since whatever, and my gut instinct, I didn't tell my parents, didn't tell my brother, didn't tell the school. My gut instinct was to just stiff up a lip, man up, don't show emotion, internalize it, don't show any cracks in my exterior, and that was just the go-to. And this is when I was like 8 or 9, so that it was ingrained in me from such a young age that was going to. Obviously, by the time I got to university, that was obviously what I was going to do.
And the same thing happened when you didn't have a panic attack for 2 weeks, and you internalised that and said, "Oh no, I'm fine.
I'm fine. Of course, I'm fine."
Yeah, and I think that is definitely what happens in the people that end up committing suicide most of the time, because more and more we're hearing about these cases because we have social media and we have things like I mentioned earlier, Roman Kemp's documentary, and that those people are people that get to the brink and unfortunately commit suicide without having told anyone that they're struggling because they feel like they can't. And that's something that we really need to change and fight towards. That's really the first major step that we need to take, isn't it?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
You mentioned earlier that you're an overthinker and that you've had panic attacks.
Yeah.
For anyone at home who's an overthinker or suffers with anxiety, panic attacks, have you got any sort of easy tricks, tips, anything that you can do, anything you've learned along the way that help that?
Yeah, it's such a tough one because they're all learned behaviours in the day. That's learned unhealthy mental health habits that you basically get into, where you think, particularly if you're an anxious person, if there's any amount of unknown, you will catastrophize it and make it seem like it could be the worst scenario possible is going to be the outcome. And it's basically through that you have this sort of information filter which is so negatively skewed, and you have, in psychological terms, I think it's called confirmation bias. That's it. It's confirmation bias. And so you've got these preconceived conclusions about what people's opinions are of you and what opinions are of yourself. Yeah. So that when you're sort of going through life and you obviously all this information, people saying stuff to you, seeing stuff, you only sort of take in the information which resonates negatively and fits that negative perception that you've got of yourself. No matter how much of other information that's come through that doesn't fit, you'll ignore that because it doesn't fit with the picture that you have created in yourself. And that is something I guess that I struggled with for a while. And the way that and again, it's something that I still struggle with, but to a lesser extent. And so what I guess I've done is that if I see myself sort of chase myself down a rabbit hole, there's a future event and I'm thinking, oh, what if this happens? What if this person said this? I reckon this person's thinking this. I take a step back, and before I sort of I try to nip it in the bud and sort of, instead of chasing down the rabbit hole of creating all these sort of hypothetical situations where I'm always coming out worse, I'll try to look at it through a more rational lens and be like, let's try to look at the bit of facts-based evidence here. Would that person do that? Would the person say that? Let's look at some past experience. No, they haven't. Is this likely to happen? Probably not. Yeah. Let's thanks brain for producing this wonderful thought. That's wonderful, but let's not put too much emphasis on it, and don't put the weight on it like I used to, and just stop, because I still again, because I haven't, I'm still an overthinker. I'm still, I guess, an inherently anxious person. I still catch myself doing it, but I stop myself in an earlier stage and I think, is this likely to happen? Is this true?
Yeah.
Would that person do that? Probably not. And then switch the conversation around and change to something positive rather than constantly, going down that spiral downhill and negative.
Trying to break that cycle of negative thoughts.
And it's not easy.
Asking yourself the simple questions is a really good tip, I think. For anyone not familiar with confirmation bias, it's where everyone does it in lots of circumstances as we move through life. It's where you look for things that are happening around you to confirm the narrative that you believe. Mm-hmm. So looking for sort of events and things and saying, oh no, that fits with the way I think, and that then leads into a bias where you block out anything else that contradicts that.
Yeah, and all the evidence, and it's generally overwhelming. If you look at all the information, the overwhelming evidence is that that's not the case, and that wouldn't happen, or that person doesn't think that. But that doesn't make a difference because that's not going to resonate with you because that doesn't fit with the way that idea that you've already. The conclusion is already drawn.
The brain is a very funny thing.
It's a funny old thing.
It has trained pathways that you repeat over and over again, even if they don't benefit you.
Yeah.
And one of the reasons for that is because you have confirmation bias. You choose to ignore things that would disprove your current thought process because your brain wants to look at something completely maybe unrelated that backs that up.
Yeah. And you've got to sometimes laugh at the funny things that your brain can do. I mean, as we said, it's the most complex thing in the universe. It's the stuff that is the same brain that can get us to the moon, but it's also the same brain that can take someone to take their own lives. So it's crazy what it can do. But I think sometimes you just got to laugh. And I think I told the story on my last podcast, and it's just a perfect example of how my brain used to work and how I used to just sort of chase my own horrible ideas down rabbit holes. And a friend of mine who spends a lot of his time in his car because of his work, he used to call me quite a lot, and we'd have just general chit-chats about nothing in particular. And then one day he stopped calling, and he didn't call me for a few days. And again, there's a small amount of unknown there. And if you're a super anxious person, you will fill that unknown with as much as you possibly can. So originally it would start with something small, be like, maybe he's, annoyed. Maybe I've done something to him. Maybe I've annoyed him. Yeah. And it's like, maybe he's got bored of speaking to me. Maybe we're not as good of friends. Maybe none of my, and he's one of my closest friends. It's like, maybe none of my friends are actually close friends. Maybe I don't have any friends. Maybe everybody hates me. And then, holy shit, I've got no friends. Fuck. And that was literally just like, from the smallest thing, you just get spiral out of control, and to this horrible conclusion where I basically, from this one tiny event, I basically, reaffirmed the fact that I'm a loser, I've got no friends, and everyone hates me. And that was like completely insane. And the funny thing is, he probably at the time, I can't remember this, he was probably speaking to me, texting me, whatever, and things were normal. So that information didn't fit with the narrative. So I was like, ignore that. I'm going to stick with my idea.
Yeah,
the fact
it's stuck, isn't it?
It's not relevant. That's in one ear, out the other.
Yeah.
And the reason why he'd funny enough, he called me in a few days later. In my head, I was like, and this left me in a sort of an anxious state throughout, the whole week. And eventually, called me, I was like, he's probably going to tell me how much he hates me. Brilliant. And he answered the phone. I was like, I've just discovered TalkSport's the best thing ever. And I literally was just like, holy shit, how did I get myself down such a deep hole? But because I was I didn't even completely dismiss it. I was like, just because it wasn't right this time, it's probably right the next time. So it's not like I completely dismissed the idea entirely, I just parked it to one side for the moment. But I remember I went to my therapist on the Monday after, and I was telling him the story. And then we both just started fucking laughing about how the ridiculousness of what I got into. And it was probably one of the first times I'd ever properly laughed at my own sort of mental health issues. And I think that was like, it's such a good tool. It's such a powerful tool.
Really empowering, isn't it?
Yeah, it's so powerful. It shows you're not entirely in control. It takes that sting, it takes the fear out of it. It's like a really, really good coping mechanism. Because like you said, your brain's a funny odd thing and it makes you do strange things.
It puts you back in control, I think, in some ways, doesn't it? Of what your brain is doing when you realise the ridiculousness of what it just
and that's
did.
the thing. It's when your sort of your mental health your brain is just not thinking rationally at all. And once you can just sort of laugh eventually at the irrationality of it and think like, I can't believe this is the conclusions that I was drawing.
Sure. Okay, for anyone perhaps maybe who is out there and they're listening to this and they are feeling not quite themselves, they might not think they have depression, they just might not feel quite themselves, or they might just feel anxious. What is the one single best bit of advice that you could give to them? Sorry to narrow it down.
I guess if it was one, I would honestly it sounds a bit corny, but like literally just have hope that there is better days to come. Like that, they're always, no matter how big a hole you've dug for yourself, no matter how bad a place you think you're in, there is always way. There's people who's had way worse mental health than me who've managed to turn 180 their life and have had long and healthy, happy lives. And there's loads and loads of stories of people doing that, being taught to bridge and then not having lots of families and, blah.
Sure.
So there's lots and lots. There's just have hope, have faith, have belief in yourself that better days are to come.
That's simply amazing, really. I've got a Instagram post ready to go with a quote on it that I've been working on for the last couple of weeks that I've just and I could honestly put your name under it now. Basically I talk about the law of impermanence, so that things are never permanent. Those thoughts, feelings and emotions, they come and they go like sort of clouds in the sky is the analogy that is always used, and there are better days to come is pretty much the last line, which is what you just said. So that that's kind of weird, but amazing that you've said that as the main single bit of advice for anyone out there that's not feeling good about themselves. So there was one bit we mentioned just briefly off air that you told me a little bit about seeing your therapist. So a couple of bits on that is seeing a therapist the most important thing you did? And can you just tell the listeners a little bit about the story you spoke about before in terms of coming to the same conclusions?
Yeah, I mean, to be honest, I don't think I'd be where I am today. And when I'm talking about these stories, it literally feels like I'm talking about a different person. And in many ways, I literally am. So I don't think I'd be where I am today without having gone to see my therapist. He was absolutely amazing and has quite literally helped me transform my life. So yes, I would say that's probably the single most life-changing thing I've done in my life, full stop, I would say. The way that therapy works is that for a long time, I wasn't emotionally capable of basically dealing with life on my own. And that was evidenced because I had bad mental health. And so therefore, I had to, the whole point to get a therapist is that they get you to lean on them and use them to support you through your life and help you deal with your emotions and help you order your thoughts and have better mental health practices. But the whole point of them is of a therapist is to wean you off needing them. And so originally I think for about a year I used to go every single week, and then after about 9-10 months I was like, I'm feeling much better. I feel like I made loads of progress, but like I'm still think I'm getting good amount of gains every single week whenever I go. But then sort of after about a year, I kind of came to the conclusion I actually don't think I need to see my therapist every single week. I'm going to probably ask him to maybe see him once every 2 weeks, once every 3 weeks. But I think I'm going to open the discussion to maybe lowering the amount of time that I see him, because I don't think there's the necessity there anymore as there used to be. And so we had our usual therapy session. And it came to the end, and he said, "Right, so I've been thinking, and I think that it's I don't think you need to see me once a week anymore." And I was like, "That is mental." I was about to say that, and I was like, "You know what? That firstly, I'm glad because it kind of shows me I'm doing my job, but secondly, it happens quite often because they basically know you. The relationship you have with a therapist is so unique, and you have to be so open and so clear and so transparent, and they basically get to say that they know you unlike anybody else.
Yeah.
And so the fact that he called me out and he basically said, "I want you to stop paying me as much money as you're doing" earlier on, shows that these guys, I think the vast majority of guys out there are just trying to make people better. This is not them to fill their pocket. They're generally trying to make people better. And so I ended up, instead of going once a week, I went once every 2 weeks, once every 3 weeks, once every month. And eventually it got to the stage where I said, I think I can go out to the big, bad, scary world by myself. I don't need you anymore, Mark. I don't know if it was called Mark. And he was like, "You know what? I've kind of been waiting the last 2 therapy sessions for you to say that, but if you didn't say it this time, I would have probably suggested it next time. I completely agree. It's time for you to go." And he gave me some really, it was that last therapy session was a really interesting one because there's a lot of time I spent reflecting on sort of how far I'd come and looking back at some of the early stories and some of the early therapy sessions that we had are crazy. And so it obviously is like a very proud moment to see how far I'd come. But also he was, he was just, like just as an FYI, once your brain has sort of reached the level of vulnerability, but if you've gone to therapy, you're actually statistically more likely to end up going again. So just be mindful and continue like with good mental health practices in your day-to-day life. And, but obviously, best of luck with everything and touch wood. I haven't been back since, but the thing is, like, now that I've been once, I would 100% go in, because I ended up buzzing to go. I used to love going by the end. The first times I used to go were really a bit uncomfortable, wasn't really sure what was going on. But by the end, I used to love it. So I'm totally open to do it again. I just personally don't feel the need, which is obviously good and shows that there's cases where people get better.
Yeah, amazing. And I think when I've spoken to patients in the past about when they've saying that they're in low in mood or depressed or anxious, I always say, people do try medication, and we haven't really touched on that, but medication often is a bit of a bridge to get you to a position in which you can then go and do something else, like make a change in your life, which could be therapy, it could be opening up to your friends, it can be lots of different, it can be meditation, to then improve your mental health to a point, that makes a difference to your life. Mm-hmm. And I think that going and speaking to someone is the most important change that someone can make, and the most beneficial. That, like you say, the relationship you have with a therapist is very special. And people that do well with therapy are people that get on with their therapist. That relationship has to be a good one where you feel completely comfortable. And the therapist acts as a bridge to work out your broken relationships with yourself and the other people around you, and he acts as sort of a mask, and something maybe you probably found yourself. Yeah, no,
absolutely. Like you said, it's a very special relationship, and so my advice is, if you want to go, don't necessarily, because when I went to my therapist, I was very lucky that I found the right therapist first time. But I know lots of people who have tried therapy and it's like, well, it's not for me because they tried one therapist. That's not the way to go about it. If one didn't work, please try a couple others, because it's such a unique relationship. You don't feel comfortable opening up with everyone. We just clicked from the day one, and I know people that have gone to see my guy and it hasn't worked out, and that's not because he wasn't good, because he worked for me and I know he's working for other people, but they didn't work for some people.
Yeah.
So
and you even felt uncomfortable at first.
But you
felt uncomfortable because it's an uncomfortable thing to do, and it's difficult to be that vulnerable.
Yeah, God, that first therapy session was a weird one. It was like 5-10 minutes of lots of awkwardness, and then suddenly like walls came down, and I basically cried for like 50 minutes straight. And there was like, I don't understand how he understood a word. I don't understand how he probably wasn't taking notes, probably just scribbling, but listening to me just like tell him random disconnected thoughts from all over my life and different thoughts that I've had and stuff. So you
just obviously had an emotional dump, and that's what you needed, and he acted as that, trash can for it. You know what I mean? Literally. Yeah. Matt, honestly, what a conversation to have. The way you speak about mental health is inspiring. It's I think it really makes things clear for people and can help people that don't, like you said earlier, don't understand what their mental health is. It puts things into a real perspective that people can understand, and that's what I'm going to hope to do in these podcasts, is to get guests on that bring a great perspective and interesting knowledge that people can take on board. And something I want to ask everyone, just one simple tip, and this could be anything you think, that what is your best advice for someone who wants to improve their health and or their happiness?
I mean, we bang on about it because there's lots of things that I do. I meditate, I walk every day, I exercise, I get my good sleep, and all of these things are great tools that I use still today on a day-to-day basis. But nothing will beat just opening up and speaking to someone. Like, it's a cliche, but it's a cliche for a reason, because it's fucking true. A problem shared is a problem halved, and this is something that I have experienced many times, not just with me, but with everybody else around me. If you've got any worries, just speak to the people around you. It will be well received, I promise that. And also, don't be surprised if they start opening up back to you, because this is something that really shocked me as well. When people say you're not alone, you're really bloody not alone. Because once you start showing vulnerability and opening up to other people, there's a likelihood is that they'll start opening up back to you. And actually, it builds much stronger, much healthier, much more open relationships. And that's something that's family, with friends, with loved ones, with everyone, it will build better relationships. And that's certainly something that I have felt. So just get out there and speak to people.
Amazing. So you heard it here first. Problem shared is a problem halved. Matt,
right.
Yeah, unreal to chat to you today. Thank you so much for spending the time to talk to me, and I'm sure that the listeners will find what you said, completely and utterly inspiring and beneficial.
But honestly, thank you so much. Keep doing what you're doing. Your content there's a lot of dribble out there on social media, and yours is one of them.
All on my page.
And it's called, the straightforward. No, honestly, you're doing it like, obviously your content is so much better than most of the dross that's up there, and the fact that you're doing such good work on mental health is obviously a cause that's close to my heart. So keep doing what you're doing, and obviously it goes without saying, my door is always open to anyone else that wants to speak to me about any further questions. Let me know.
Yeah, sure. So if you sort of been interested or affected by anything we spoke about today, then please feel free to message us. We'll be happy to talk to you. So yeah, brilliant. Thanks, Matt.
Thank you, man.
And that's a wrap for this episode of the Straight Talking Doctor Pod. I hope you not only found this episode interesting, but also hopefully learned something that you can use to help improve your life. If you enjoyed the podcast, or even if you didn't, I'd be so grateful if you could go onto your streaming site and leave a 5-star review so that I can reach as many people as possible. Finally, if you have any feedback or suggestions for further guests, please get in touch with me at The Straight Talking Doctor on Instagram.